It is Friday, April 18th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back to another Great Circle episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The April games are still live on PSN. Make sure you claim those. Also, PS Plus Extra and Premium, that lineup is now live on PSN as well. And normally this would be where we talk about the games that are leaving the service, but as of right now, that is not showing up on PSN, or at least not on PlayStation 5, so cannot stand when this happens, but the last chance to play section under collections is not there, so we don't know what is leaving. It seems like there were some early screenshots showing up on PS4 where it might be Days Gone, which is leaving because, granted, you have the PS5 remaster coming in fairly soon, so that might be what's going on there. Also Bloodborne, so not really sure, right? Because that's the whole point of the last chance to play section, letting people know, hey, these games are leaving, and that is maybe the minimum courtesy that should be happening with PS Plus, because we can just go into our first story, which is the prices are going up even more so. And we had this weird spot where between last week's episode, where it was Latin America countries, and then a few days later we did a sort of breaking news story about PS5 prices going up in certain countries, and we then followed up on how the prices went up in not just Latin America, but also Southeast Asia, South Korea, Australia, but now, more recently, Canada as well. So PS Plus Essential for 12 months is 109 Canadian, PS Plus Extra, $190, PS Plus Premium, $224.99 Canadian. My God, that is so much money. And the breaking news on Sunday was that PS5 console pricing going up. Sony says it's due to a challenging economic environment, including high inflation and fluctuating exchange rates. So in the UK and Europe, digital edition console is increased, and then the disc and digital edition console is going up in Australia and New Zealand. And to offset that, they're decreasing the price of the disc drive in all affected regions, which is a very small band-aid fix to what is just a very large problem of everything is getting far more expensive nowadays, and there's really just nothing else to say outside of what's already been said so many times over. Yeah, things all around us are getting more expensive, so it seemed like it was more of an inevitability that it would happen for PlayStation products and services, especially in the wake of tariffs, which the other update we can give there for the U.S. administration, and that was the other weird thing that we have to clarify from Sunday, where there were exemptions that were put in place, or at least announced from the border, but it was still only for PCs and consoles, and then shortly after that, the U.S. President, Donald Trump, said, actually, that's not the case. But either way, consoles were still never a part of that original list, so things are changing so fast, things are getting more expensive all around us. You see that SIE, of course, is in this position like any other company trying to sort of navigate it, but in a way it's also like a great excuse to increase prices, and it's a sort of global crossfire situation, right? Because this is all a lot of U.S. political stuff and the trade war that's going on, and yet the prices are going up in all these other surrounding countries. So I think at this point it's just inevitable, too, that the prices will go up in the United States, but it seems like there's still a very clear reluctance to do that, and it's the same points we keep making, so I think there's really not much more to add here outside of they're going to try and not increase the price if they don't have to. They're allocating resources, moving consoles around, shipping things where they can to not make these things absurdly expensive, because there is still sort of a due diligence and responsibility to the customer, and for console buyers that are more price sensitive than maybe other sectors of the entertainment business, but it's just it's still expensive. So there's nothing else to really add here outside of, I guess, here's the thing, right? At a certain point, you would think things are going to go in the other direction of customers leaving these services en masse. But then you read a recent story like how Netflix's recent revenue hits all-time highs because of their recent price hikes. So you've got customers that are willing to stay on board. There might be an initial drop-off, but sure enough, people come back in droves, or they just stay on board with their recurring revenue billing cycle, right? So it's like that's the thing with PlayStation. We could complain all day, every day about PS Plus pricing, but if people don't start leaving en masse, it's just not going to change. If enough people leave, then it would be a sort of downward trend. But we'll see what's being said with the next financial report, which I think will be quite telling given where we are right now. But it might take a few quarters and certainly a few months to see where all this trade war and political landscape ends up shaking out, and where Sony comes out of the other side of this. But it still might be a very long time until we see this maybe sort of settle down. Moving on to Bungie's Marathon, where we did finally get that full-blown gameplay reveal, so now we see a lot more of this game, and we know what it looks like, how it plays, or at least how it might play, and also what it may or may not cost. So I think we did learn a lot more about this game than we otherwise would have thought, but it actually is coming out this year, September 23rd, that's confirmed, and also a playable closed alpha begins April 23rd as well, so you could probably play this game very soon if you sign up via the official Discord. I'm not sure how many people they're going to let in, but you will have the chance to play this game fairly soon. And as for a general recap on the gameplay, it is indeed a squad-based extraction shooter, so not too surprising there. The gameplay loop being that you come into the game with other enemy squads and you try to find the loot before they do and get out of there alive. Characters have unique abilities, weapons have skill trees, and all the collected resources are going to advance that, so very typical extraction shooter gameplay loop. And we do know that this will be a paid title, but it won't be $70. That was confirmed by Bungie themselves, responding on Twitter. They said they'll announce the full details this summer. Now you have to imagine, given that Asahi is the owner, and we saw Helldivers 2 and Concord come out at $40 as a premium paid title, that will likely be the same neighborhood. Not sure if $39.99 is like the sweet spot there. Maybe they'll be a little bit bold and price it even lower, given that based on the content that's been announced so far, which is like 3 maps and a handful of characters, there's already been some contention on, I have to pay money, and it doesn't sound like there's a lot there. But it's kind of that debate, which we saw during like the Helldivers 2 thing, and then shortly after Concord, which is, there were so many problems with Concord, don't get me wrong, but it was still really humorous to see that game fail the way that it did, and everyone had this short-term memory of like, of course it was the $40 price tag. It's like, well, sure, that played a role, but it's all these other things, and it's like, why are we forgetting that Helldivers 2 did very well at $40? In fact, you had a very noticeable amount of conversations surrounding that topic, or that game rather, of, hey, it cost $40, and it's really cool that it felt like a complete package. Now, there is the monetizing they did after the fact with war bonds and things like that, and there were certainly little controversies surrounding that, but generally speaking, there was a lot of appreciation from the wider community of, yeah, it's not free to play, but I like that I paid a small amount, and there was something there that I got a lot of value out of. So it's like, of course we could possibly return to that model, even though it is really tough nowadays with this sort of race to the bottom that the last decade has seen, and that, these sort of live service games that are fighting for your time, it's really tough to break into that, especially when you're asking to pay for it to even get in the first place, right? So it's that usual talk of like, is there enough room for this game to show up and pull people away from the black hole games, that being your Overwatch, Destiny, Fortnite, things like that, even the cannibalizing of Destiny, obviously. But that's the thing. We're hearing that the gameplay and the gunplay, it feels very similar to Destiny, so you've got that satisfying, snappy responsiveness of the gunplay and how bullets can connect, and there's a satisfying feel from the moment-to-moment moving around and actually getting kills, and also the mobility of the characters. Now, this is something where, and I'll always be the first to admit, similar to Concord, not really the kind of game I probably would be interested in playing myself, but much like Concord, we of course follow the business side of it and see how this game will end up doing. So I am very fascinated to see how it will do, even though I might not want to play this myself. I will say this, though. As far as art direction, I think it kind of stands out, the sort of highlighter green that they're going with, where all these environments really kind of, again, I guess it stands out from everything else that can maybe feel a little bit samey. But it's a very valid question of, can this really pull people away from everything else that they're doing nowadays? That is the really tough spot. Even Bungie, where it's a new exciting thing that they're doing this kind of experience, this new extraction shooter, even they are, I think, going to be walking into a very steep uphill battle. But I would never be the one to suggest that this game is going to fail day one, when you never know if they can find some sort of audience there that can maintain it for even just a little bit, and it sort of grows organically. I mean, there's that possibility too. There's always a chance that another Helldivers 2 shows up, but that was still a very different gameplay loop versus what this is. Extraction shooter is kind of the turnoff for a lot of people, which I think is also very valid. So there you go, Marathon coming out this year, which I didn't think this game was like showing up this year. More so, it's going up against Borderlands 4 and very close to GTA 6 if it does still end up shipping this year, which is really just another round of problems for this game. But I wouldn't count it out just yet. So this summer we'll see what Bungie says and what they'll show off, but at least there will be a playable alpha very soon, and we'll have more people talking about the game in the next few days. Next up, we have a very interesting accessibility option coming to Death Stranding 2 on the beach, where I probably would not use this, and I imagine most of you probably wouldn't use it either, but it does seem very cool for some that need it, and that is the option to skip boss battles. But it turns out when you skip the boss battle, it will play a visual novel type experience instead to show you what happened, and then you get back to gameplay. So this was spotted by Genki_JPN on Twitter, where they did the translation from the Hideo Kojima radio show, and Kojima, I believe, was the one explaining this and how it's going to be an option in the game. And that's cool. It's a cool take on the option to skip certain segments of a game, where and again, I wouldn't use this, but there are cases where it makes sense. Like, the one I can think of, at least right now, is Spider-Man 2, and then I think it was in Remastered as well, but it's all the puzzle segments. I didn't skip them on my first playthrough, but absolutely did for the second playthrough. It's I just don't feel like, dealing with this right now. So it was cool that, there's just a blanket option of, you can just go past this. I know some like to be really argumentative about how that shouldn't be a thing, but it's you don't have to use it. Options are always good. How are they not good? And the thing about this option too is that it's very much, I would imagine, trying to address the other core issue that games have always had. And studios have looked at this for a long time as far as studies, and now you can sort of see this with your own telemetry on PSN, for example, with trophies. If a trophy is tied to finish the game on easy difficulty, and you can see that even for something that sounds so simple in practice, maybe 5, 10, 20% of people have earned it if they're online and they synced with PSN. And it just shows you that the vast majority of games, most people are just not seeing the back half of these titles. Studios want people to finish their games, so they always try and figure out ways to break down those barriers, especially for people that are maybe not too experienced with games. And so this, I think, is just another great option and a very unique way to approach it as well. So somebody that's struggling with these boss battles won't feel like they're really missing out if they choose to end up using it. I thought that was pretty neat. Moving on to a very big rumor for the local play PlayStation Portable that Sony is apparently working on right now and may release around or somewhat near PlayStation 6. And, we've been following this for a little bit, and it comes from the original source, which was Kepler L2 on NeoGAF. And if you recall, Kepler L2 is the one that also cited some initial PS5 Pro details, and they were dead accurate. And so they were also the first one to mention that Sony is developing 2 next-generation SoCs, one for PlayStation 6, the other presumably this portable PlayStation, which SoC means system on a chip, so the chip actually powering these devices. So initially, Kepler made this post back in March where people were discussing the performance level of this rumored device, and Kepler claims it's a 15-watt SoC on a 3-nanometer process. Now, they were pretty much telling people in the thread that because of that, it's not going to match PS5's performance parameters. And then more recently in the same thread, they answered a few people and stated that this SoC is specifically designed to run at very, very low voltages, and the CU count on it is a lot less than 40, and it does share a few things with Soundwave, but again, it's a different SoC. As for the expected performance in layman's terms, they say it's hard to estimate considering it's an unreleased GPU microarchitecture, but they do estimate it's between an Xbox Series S and a PS5. Kepler also claims that tape-out is a few months after the PS6 SoC, implying the release schedule could be fairly close, and they do say it can run PS5 games, just not at the same resolution or frame rate, and that's down to lower memory bandwidth. And that's the latest news about this handheld. Again, it comes from the same person, but they were dead accurate about certain details regarding PS5 Pro that were actually then specifically outlined in that PS5 Pro seminar. So they do seem to have some insight into what Sony's up to for this sort of long-term engineering roadmap. And the tape-out thing is very noteworthy, given that if it's a few months after PlayStation 6, that would put it in the neighborhood, the ballpark of like whenever we're expecting PlayStation 6, which as far as we know still sounds like, holiday 2027. Maybe it would end up being 28 if they want to delay things given what is going on right now. But, that's all speculation, obviously. But it does seem like whenever PS6 becomes a thing, this would not be too far behind. And these SoCs would very much have to be developed in tandem given the playability of software. I think that's maybe where a lot of people are, wondering why, like, how does this device make sense? I mean, now the thing is, of course, it could obviously play PlayStation 5 games with lower performance, lower frame rate, because that's what Steam Deck does right now. That's what the ROG Ally can do. They can, on paper play PlayStation 5 experiences, but you just see some very obvious visual drawbacks. That's the sort of portable PC or even Switch 2 landscape. But like Switch 2, for example, when you have reconstruction methods come in like DLSS, you can see some pretty amazing results for what is a 1080p screen. These games don't have to be native 1080 at all, right? You can have a lower internal res, and you can just see a lot of very pretty looking games in a portable form factor. But point being, these would probably be developed in tandem, very similar to PS4 and Vita in the same way, right? Now, obviously, Vita and PS4 were still very much two completely separate developer environments, and that's why we had the problem of developer support on Vita and how we'll never see another standalone handheld ever again. In this case, and I'm saying it right here, right now, I would safely expect this is something where Sony is making a software development kit for PlayStation 6 that is very conducive to making an executable that has these different, well, let's say they update the existing dev kit and this new one that's for PlayStation 6, right? But basically we're looking at this reality where, because PS5 is not going anywhere by the time PS6 comes out. So the point I'm trying to make is that a studio ships a game and let's say 2028, 29, 2030, and they have the option developing on these dev kits to make an executable that runs on PlayStation 5, PS5 Pro, PS6, and this new portable. It's one executable, but depending on what system you're running it on, that is the variant you get. Very similar to what PlayStation games do right now when it's a PS4 Pro mode, PS5 Pro mode, and of course going into PlayStation 6. But you're going to want to make this environment where it's very easy to make that portable setting. So I would think that's what they're aiming to do. Which I think opens up a very big conversation too, as far as like what the expectation is on the software side, because I've still always said, like, if they ever do another portable PlayStation, it's going to play pretty much every PS4 game. I would imagine a compatibility layer will be put in place there where it's going to play all the PS4 stuff, no problem. PS5 games will very likely need patches, and that's not too shocking at all. PS6 onward, and that's where it also gets a bit awkward, right? Because if we talk about a local play handheld that comes out near PlayStation 6, and it's not going to be able to just retroactively play all the PS5 stuff without patches, where does that put it for PlayStation 6 titles? But it's like, well, that would be probably the same circumstance. But if I had to guess, it might be either, well, I don't even want to say either. It would maybe be a mandate, as in the new mandate from Sony as if you ship a PlayStation 6 game, PS5, I think it could be a sort of toss-up, maybe after a certain date. If you're doing a PS5 game or 6, the mandate is it has to support the new PlayStation Portable. Because the thing is, they don't mandate Pro support. You are allowed to ship a PS5 game. You don't have to support PS5 Pro. The Portable, I would imagine, they want that to be a device that you can safely expect most of your software is going to launch. And since there's an entire PS5 native library that is going to have to be highly dependent on patches, they want a new cycle to start where every PS6 game will have a portable option that is playable on that device. So I would have to say that's probably what we're looking at for how this device makes sense, especially given that because they're developing them at the same time, and you would expect PS6 comes out first and this device comes out after the fact, there's a sort of logistical way that you have to explain and telegraph that to the customer and you don't want to ship these two things, and they're obviously going to be very expensive just on their own, right? So it's like PS6 comes out, they have some time for that console to just make its debut, build up an install base. Hey, here's this extension device. It has local play, and it plays all PlayStation 6 stuff from this point on. And some of your favorite PS5 titles have some patches, and it plays all PS4 stuff and this, that, and the fourth, right? So that's sort of where I think this thing is, how it's going to be propped up and what the timeline is looking like. We'll follow this very closely, of course, and keep up with the rumors and see what ends up being a reality. But I'd put good money on that maybe being what we're looking at. And I think it's an exciting prospect to know that Sony is returning back to local play where it financially makes sense. And that is a single dev environment where it's just the games can run on whatever PlayStation you have in that moment. Moving on to Mr. Shuhei Yoshida, who has still been just doing a bunch of interviews and podcasts. And again, I can't believe he's saying as many things as he's saying ever since leaving SIE. But recently he was on the Easy Allies podcast. The topic of Sucker Punch came up, and he gave just a little interesting anecdote where he said, and I quote here, "Naughty Dog and Sucker Punch always make the game feel right. You forget you're holding the controller because it feels so natural and intuitive to play." He went on to explain that with Sucker Punch, during the early stages of development for a game like Yote, they have a playable build that is usually bug-free and doesn't crash. And so every time he visits the studio and he tries Yote, it always felt great. It was a solid build. And it really speaks volumes about Sucker Punch as a studio. That it sounds like whatever they're, as they're working on this game, like it's just solid all the way through. Because that's the thing you always hear from studios and developers is, oh man, this thing looks like an absolute garbage nightmare fest right up until release. But Sucker Punch seems to be a well-oiled machine, and still very excited to see Yote ship later this year. In other Shuhei Yoshida news, we also learned that he's too crazy to be the CEO of SIE. Just one of those funny things that popped up where it was another conversation. This showed up on Stephen Totillo's newsletter GameFile, where he had a number of developers ask each other questions. And so the Virtuos CEO asked Shuhei Yoshida, why was he not the boss of SIE today? And so Yoshida said it's because he doesn't think like a suit, and they probably didn't trust him to make the best business decisions. Quote, "I always wanted to do something interesting, something new or innovative and never done before that may become the great thing in the future kind of thing. Look at all the heads of SIE in the past. Other than Ken Kutaragi, he was crazy, right? So he did something totally crazy. But after Ken, Kaz, Andrew, Jim Ryan, all business people, right? So there must be a reason for that." I find this so funny where he labels Ken as crazy because, that is so true. I mean, the thing is, we can always put respect on Ken's name, the father of PlayStation. None of us would be here or having the experiences we have on this console without Ken. But it's like, he is the crazy one. And it does fall back on PlayStation 3. The reality is the man spent $400 million and had this joint collaboration between IBM, Toshiba, and Sony to make the cell processor, this super lofty goal of having this SoC power not just PlayStation 3, but also all these different devices. And it simply did not take off the way that they were intending it to be. This, this multi-threaded architecture, which was a huge pain, and it didn't see the wide adoption that Ken was expecting, that I think most of Sony was expecting. And that's why, at the time, it was a very big deal that, everyone thought Ken was lined up to be the CEO of the entire Sony group, and he ended up leaving instead. So it makes so much sense in that he phrased it like that, but also I find it weird that, and I don't think he really made it clear in the conversation, I would have always pegged Shuhei as somebody that didn't want to be the CEO of the entire organization anyway. That's why it still made so much sense when he took the indie role, because it's like, yeah, that makes so much sense for him, even knowing that, he had this kind of ultimatum of there's not really any other big senior position he can move into if he had to sort of step down from leading the first-party studios. But I would have never considered him to lead the entire business, so... And that would make sense anyway that he maybe was never considered, because he would make those kinds of decisions, which is sometimes good. Sometimes it has huge payoffs. Other times it's a lot risky. But, you see the Kaz years, the Andrew House years. I know people have a problem with the Jim Ryan years, but, the Andrew House and Kaz years were generally pretty good, and they led PlayStation into a good future. So Yeah, that was it was funny to hear him say it like that, though, for sure. Okay, moving on to an update for the physical video game market, where we actually just had a talk about this yesterday, where it was more of the negative stories going around between Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft. Like them shipping a stub version of Indiana Jones, or Sony skipping Days Gone Remastered, Nintendo and Game Key cards. But there is still, some good news every so often, and it's the same thing we've heard before, which is the sales ratio. Sometimes, in some cases, can still favor physical. And so that's what we heard yesterday from a new report from Christopher Dring over on their new site, The Game Business, where they put up this piece about physical games and they provided some stats. So last year in the UK, physical game sales fell 26%, not good, and in Europe, 22%. So for the first quarter of this year, sales are down 30%. Still not great, but despite those metrics, you can still get more granular and see the platform and game-by-game splits. So Nintendo has always been the most physical leaning of the big three, and new Switch games are still around 80% physical in Europe. For PlayStation, Chris gave a really important metric here, counting only games that are available in both mediums. So in 2023, 55% of games sold on PS5 were digital, and that did jump to 64% in 2024. That distinction is important because the ratio that Sony provides in their fiscal reports includes all full games on PSN. Granted, it's a global number versus the EU numbers that Chris gave, but it does still show a slight difference. Now, looking at a game-by-game basis, Helldivers 2 was 90% digital, but single-player games are different. So 45% of Hogwarts Legacy, 49% of Assassin's Creed Mirage, and 45% of RE4 Remake sales were physical in the UK. Spider-Man 2 was also 54% physical, which is similar to the Astrobot numbers we got before. That game was 55% physical in the UK and 60% in Europe. So there is still very much many examples out there, at least in the UK and Europe, because those are the numbers that Chris has. Sometimes we get these from Matt Piscatella, not nearly as often, but we do see these splits where some games, and certainly PlayStation Studio titles, when we're talking about PlayStation hardware, they do lean more physical than third-party games or, of course, online games, which makes a lot of sense too. But that's why it's still kind of surprising that Days Gone Remastered is not getting a disc print. I mean, I think it was somewhat easy to look at the PSVR 2 stuff and go, okay, Horizon Call the Mountain or Firewall Ultra, where they're not expecting to move more than maybe 15,000 units of that game overall. Okay, then there's an issue there. So, but in the case of Days Gone Remastered, maybe they still will eventually do it. You would like to think so, but that's still why I'm very firm on the idea that we're only a few years away from PlayStation 6. It's going to play discs. And I still think maybe I'm a little bit nervous, but for the most part, I think, yes, we'll have PS6 games printed and those will be available at retail. Nintendo obviously is still very physical with Switch 2 coming up, and it might even be the case going into their following system after Switch 2, but there is still something there. But it's the same point I've always made, and I'll make it again from just yesterday, which is it lives and dies from Sony, Nintendo, Microsoft. If they don't offer it, then we don't have it, but there are buyers out there despite year-over-year declines. It just sucks that we can look at one of those manufacturers, and I would be hard-pressed to see them offer discs going into the next cycle, but at least Sony and Nintendo, we should still expect support, even though we're seeing some half-baked support nowadays with some games that require online, like the game key cards or the stub prints. Moving on to some PlayStation Productions news, where Twisted Metal Season 2 is premiering July 31st. So Peacock has confirmed a summer release, and that's not too far away. So if you really loved the first season, then the Twisted Metal tournament is going to kick off this summer. That's great to see. And then going into The Last of Us HBO Season 2, the Episode 1 premiere, we are hearing from Deadline that the episode pulled in 5.3 million same-day U.S. viewers, which was around 10% 20% more than the season 1 premiere. So a lot of people tuning in, more so now. And season 1 saw a huge jump in viewership from the week prior. It was up like 150%, which, that's obviously people tuning back into the series, getting caught up either for the first time or just getting a refresher, which my mom is doing right now, by the way, before she jumps into episode 1. And it's great to see her go into it not knowing at all what's going to happen. So that's been interesting. But episode 1, I enjoyed it a lot. I'll tell you, I'm not going to sit here and review the whole thing, obviously, but I will say me and John had a talk and reviewed it for the recent episode of Click R3, so that's up right now on the Spawncast Network channel. So episode 21 of Click R3, right near the very end, me and John do a pretty long form discussion about that episode and dive into that in greater detail. But I can say right here and now, enjoyed it. I think episode 2 is where things will really start to ramp up. I mean, the first episode can always feel a little bit slow in any series sometimes, but for the most part, really enjoyed it. And it's going to be interesting to see them play with the timeline here, obviously, because it is very much different from the games already in some cases, like the liberties they're taking. So I just can't wait to see more about how it's going to play out, and we'll see with next week's episode. Very excited to see that kick off. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below or scan the QR code, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are some of the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. And our Sunday breaking news story was the PS5 pricing going up. And then yesterday we had the physical games discussion for the big 3 platform holders. And then coming up, if the video is on time, it will be Tuesday, since obviously I was a little bit skewed from this past week. Sometimes things just take a little bit longer, but it should be this coming Tuesday, if not Wednesday or Thursday. But that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.